Communication among members of social units existing within the game's narrative is also an important interpersonal communication process. However, it isn't clear whether playing in a certain large unit or faction in a game's narrative actually affects interpersonal behaviors. There's some evidence that, for example, the aesthetics, the look of certain online game factions may attract some players. For example, Schwartz in 2006 implied that certain gamers may self-select into certain online factions. Like, for example, committed players may select the warrior-like underdog hardcore game faction. Or there's also evidence that would imply that online clans would form group norms that are congruent with what's expected of them based on the game's narrative. Consider, for example, that WoW, World of Warcraft, features two main factions, the Alliance and the Horde. The Alliance has a more Western or First World aesthetic and fights for restoring order to the game world. The Horde has a more non-Western and Third World aesthetic and has more of an outcast, tribal, and brutal aesthetic. This according to Schwartz in 2006. More committed PvP players selected the Horde, while Alliance members were more conservative and careful, according to a study done by Mosley in 2010. Horde players spent more time playing PvP player versus player games in comparison to Alliance players, thus fitting the mold of more committed hardcore Horde players. In addition to this, Williams and Associates report that Horde guild members and Horde PvP players were more egalitarian and also had more of a warrior-like ethic in comparison to Alliance players. These effects, however, were rather small. Consider a different game. For example, PlanetSide 2 has an ongoing three-way civil war in which players can join outfits or squads that are in these different three main factions. Now, one of the things that's special about PlanetSide 2 is the fact that players are not only in a faction, but also are fighting a war against two other factions. In this way, game faction arrangement may perhaps affect the interpersonal communication dynamics of people playing PlanetSide 2. For example, a study done by Poor in 2014 showed that there was more bonding occurring among same faction players. At the same time, because the game's narrative and the game's design itself necessitates a three-way civil war, players in PlanetSide 2 also performed social bridging functions and acted as hole spanners between factions because they also needed to communicate with players in other factions for them to coordinate the game. They needed to have their opponents on speed dial in order to coordinate the game.